Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the source material you trust, from groundbreaking research to, well, complex narrative fiction, and really distill it down to the essential, unforgettable insights.
And today, we're immersing ourselves in the masterful world of Scott Turow's legal epic, Presumed Innocent.
Yeah, and this isn't just about revisiting a best-selling thriller. We're using these detailed excerpts from the narrative to basically perform an autopsy on a political murder.
That's a great way to put it. Our sources, they reveal the really intricate mechanics of the plot, the suffocating psychology weighing on the characters, and, crucially, the absolutely corrupt legal and political infrastructure of Kindle County.
Which sets the stage for everything.
For everything that follows, yeah.
So our mission is pretty clear. We want to systematically unpack all these layers, the institutional rot, the sheer audacity of the personal betrayal at its heart, and of course the complex legal maneuverings that turn Rusty Sabich, one of the county's top prosecutors, into the prime suspect.
In the very case he was supposed to be solving.
Exactly.
And what makes this novel such a classic and why our sources really emphasize its importance is the verisimilitude, that intense reality that Turow, who was a prosecutor himself, injects into every single courtroom procedure.
It feels real.
It feels incredibly real. This is basically a masterclass in how ambition, marriage, and political survival just violently intersect in the criminal justice system. It's a place where, as the sources note, every dark twist of legal statute and human nature is convincingly revealed.
And we're going right inside the mind of the accused, who also happens to be our narrator, which gives us this profoundly gripping and provocative dilemma right from the very start. Okay, well, let's start unpacking this whole structure by starting with the man at the center of it all, Rusty Sabich. He's got this unfortunate distinction of being both the establishment and the target.
Right. He's our married prosecuting attorney and the chief deputy prosecuting attorney. It's a position of immense trust.
Which makes his fall just so spectacular.
And his conflict is immediate. It's completely debilitating because we, the reader, we get to watch him live in these two completely irreconcilable worlds.
Yeah, he notes this himself, this painful duality. He says that when he's sitting in court, he actually forgets who is on trial in certain moments.
The weight of his own looming fate is just so overwhelming. It's completely overshadowing his professional duties.
But then in his office, you get this little flicker of the old Rusty. He can still attack the books. He can be the sharp lawyer he once was.
Precisely. And that flicker is his last anchor to sanity. He's trying to be this competent, rational lawyer investigating a murder, while at the same time realizing that all the rules of the system he helped build
are about to be used to crush him.
To crush him. He's an outsider looking in on his own impending doom, and he's forced to operate within the very legal boundaries that his personal actions, the affair, completely shredded.
And the catalyst for this entire disaster is the victim, Carolyn Polhemus. She's described as a smart, sexy lawyer, brutally raped and murdered on the 1st of April.
Carolyn's profile in the PA's office is just so crucial to understanding the political fallout. Her background wasn't typical. She'd been a probation officer before law school.
Okay.
And within the office, she carved out the specific niche for herself, handling sexual assault cases and, claiming a special sympathy with victims.
Right. And Rusty observes that this specialization sometimes revealed these alternating moods of tenderness and rage, which really suggests a volatile personality beneath that professional facade.
Oh, absolutely. She was a force, a high-octane personality. She was known to get around and was generally described as a beautiful woman of modern temperament.
And this wasn't a quiet crime either. The sources really stress that killing a prosecutor, especially one as high-profile as Carolyn, was seen by law enforcement as, what is it?
Only one step short of killing a cop.
Right.
And that phrase, it instantly raises the stakes for the entire PA's office for the police department. The pressure to solve this quickly, correctly, and publicly is just astronomical.
But the crime scene itself, it immediately throws suspicion onto an insider. Rusty notes there were no broken windows, no forced doors.
Which means the killer was likely an acquaintance, right? It's certainly not some random, desperate, demented slug breaking in off the street.
And that assumption of familiarity, it just taints the entire investigation from minute one. So the moment Rusty really became vulnerable, the moment he sealed his fate, was when he began his affair with Carolyn. It's depicted less as a secret romance and more like an existential explosion that just rips him out of his stable life.
The origin point really matters here. It all began during the intense, high-pressure Darryl McGaffin trial. Rusty was just mesmerized by her competence and her energy. He found her magnificent.
And the first encounter was it was pure impulse.
Completely. Driven by sheer, uncontrolled stress and attraction. Rusty recalls the shock, saying he came like lightning, and that was followed by this sense of idleness and profound disorientation. He's just lying in her fashionable loft asking himself, what in the fuck I was doing with my life?
That feeling of disorientation seems to define the whole affair, doesn't it? Rusty saw Carolyn as pure phenomenon, like this almost supernatural force that arrived as a rescue.
A rescue from the suffocating stability of his family life. Yeah. He felt trapped in the diligent, slowly moving circles of my life.
And she was the antidote to all that domestic reality.
Absolutely. He was constantly distracted by worries about home, the corroding rain gutters, his son Nat's math struggles. He called it the spectral intervention of his domestic anxiety. With Carolyn, he was in the land beyond restraint.
And after 20 years with his wife, Barbara, where intimacy was maybe strained or just routine, Carolyn allowed him to feel untethered and intensely alive.
So this relationship wasn't just sex. It was Rusty, on a subconscious level, trying to divide and destroy his entire world to justify this dizzying new reality.
But Carolyn wasn't just offering an escape. She was demanding total possession.
Yeah.
The sources depict their intimacy as extremely confrontational.
Very. She liked sex rough. She talked dirty. She boosted his ego while at the same time undermining his marriage.
She was absolutely masterful at psychological warfare.
Oh, yeah. The key moment illustrating this is when she deliberately injects Barbara, his wife, right into their dialogue. She asks him, "Does Barbara do this for you?"
Wow. And that's not just pillow talk?
No, it's a clear move to establish her own dominion. She was systematically trying to isolate Rusty, pushing him toward leaving his past life entirely, his marriage, and maybe even the political structure that defined his career. She wanted the commitment, and she wanted the political leverage that commitment might bring.
And this explosive personal chaos, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It occurred right as Kindle County's own institutions were just tearing themselves apart politically.
Right. The murder happens amid this ferocious campaign for the prosecuting attorney seat. It creates the perfect storm.
So you have the incumbent, Raymond Horgan, who is really the picture of the tiring establishment.
Yeah, he's balding, getting stout. He's still a consummate public man, but he's clearly overwhelmed. The sources show him confessing he's lost his ability to cope and that his office is on the verge of chaos.
So a high-profile murder, especially of one of his own deputies, is a political disaster for him.
Which opens the door for the ambitious challenger, Nico Della Guardia. Rusty dismissively calls him a pygmy in his soul, but that's just professional rivalry talking.
Right, because Nico is radiating confidence. He's got this strong, clear message that Raymond is soft and tired.
And Nico is a master opportunist. He immediately weaponizes the murder and the chaos in Horgan's office for headlines. He positions himself as the tough-on-crime alternative. He gets that in political theater, appearances matter way more than complex truth.
And the most dangerous political operator in Nico's corner is Tommy Molto. The sources give him this moniker, the Mad Monk.
It's a fantastic descriptor for this zealous-driven former deputy PA.
Yeah, it is.
Molto is defined by his bitter loyalty and his zealotry. He's described physically overweight, pockmarked, chewing his nails down to the quick, but his mental state is what's really important.
And Rusty had fired him, right?
Yeah, Rusty fired Molto from the PA's office for overtly maneuvering against Horgan, which makes his defection to Nico's campaign personal and deeply public. Headlines like "Disappointed Horgan Deputy Backs Nico" legitimized Nico's challenge and just amplified the idea that Horgan's office was collapsing from the inside.
And Rusty's specific analysis of Molto is so telling. He says Molto always seemed to me to be trying to make facts rather than to understand them.
He's not interested in justice. He's interested in securing a conviction for political gain. He is the definition of the zealous operative who burns at too high a temperature. He needs a target, and when the original murder investigation stalls, he finds the perfect, high-profile target in Rusty.
Standing in stark contrast to Molto's political fire is Rusty's closest friend and cop liaison, Dan Leprancer, or Lip.
Lip is the necessary guide through the underworld. He's portrayed as solitary, almost melancholic, a scholar of the underlife. He works alone, reporting to a captain who only cares about clearing cases, which gives Lip this cynical, rheumy-eyed, sulking look from constantly dealing with the world of big-time bad guys.
And his value to Rusty is his utter loyalty. and his access to that street-level information that bypasses all the political noise of the PA's office.
But their relationship is immediately tested. The moment Rusty tells Lip that Carolyn always locked her doors and windows, Lip understands the implication.
The killer was known.
Exactly. And Rusty delayed telling him this, and Lip doesn't miss the fact that Rusty is already trying to manage the flow of information to protect himself long before he becomes the official suspect. This sets up Lip's later, crucial and very conflicted testimony.
So the early investigation, which is led by Rusty, is deliberately, well, it's pretty desultory. He's trying to cover his own tracks.
Right.
But in doing so, he stumbles across a major piece of evidence that points away from his personal drama and straight into institutional corruption.
A missing case file. And this is where the novel shifts from a whodunit to a deep examination of political maneuvering. Rusty discovers a case file is missing from Carolyn's docket, listed as a B file.
Okay, what's a B file?
Well, crucially, this B file refers to the state criminal code subsection dealing with bribery of law enforcement. It's highly sensitive and not Carolyn's typical kind of case.
And it was marked unsub, right? Unknown subject, meaning it was a preliminary non-arrest investigation.
Something that should have been directly under Rusty's supervision as chief deputy. So the question is, why did Carolyn have a file that was outside her domain and dealt with corruption?
And the answer is shocking. It just reveals the utter degradation of Raymond Horgan's office.
Yeah, Horgan, deep into his political crisis, finally confesses to Rusty that he gave Carolyn the file because she asked and I was sleeping with her.
So he was romantically involved with her, and in his distracted state, he just wanted the file handled quietly.
And he admits he didn't want the file floating around during an election because it pointed to a massive scandal, an unnoticed, worse, unapprehended bribery ring operating in one of the branch courts.
It wasn't just a threat to his campaign then. It threatened to expose nearly a decade of institutional misdeeds.
And we get the specific, painful details of this bribery scandal through an anonymous letter sent to Horgan himself. The letter details a $1,500 bribe given 9 years prior at the North Branch Court run-in and 111th.
Okay, let's slow down here because the context of this bribe defines the entire political history of Kindle County. What exactly was this bribe for? And why was it so dangerous for Raymond Horgan?
The letter writer described a man named Noel who was very paranoid and embarrassed by his crime. Noel placed the $1,500 in a sock, in the center drawer of a desk, in an office with Horgan's name on the door.
The detail is incredible.
It's so specific. And 10 days later, the case was dismissed. The sheer detail money in a sock, the specific office, it suggests an insider who is deeply familiar with the system.
And Horgan's immediate reaction suggests this wasn't an isolated incident. The sources connect this to the North Branch Court's specialty.
Exactly. The North Branch Court was the destination for cases resulting from a concerted cleanup operation that was orchestrated 9 months before Raymond's first re-election campaign.
And this operation targeted sexual crimes. Right. Specifically, homosexual men arrested in flagrante delicto, caught in the act in public forests.
So the bribery was a systemic way to make politically embarrassing problems just disappear.
It was a massive political cover-up.
A huge one. The money was paid, and the cases were disposed of quietly, either through expungible guilty pleas or outright dismissals. Horgan was protecting his image as a respectable prosecutor by sweeping sordid sexual arrests under the rug. He effectively created a parallel justice system for those with money and connections.
And the anonymous letter writer who claims they were trusting Horgan exposed a first-class scandal that could destroy Horgan's career.
Which is why he was so desperate to give the B file to Carolyn, someone he trusted completely in his compromised state.
So Raymond's decision to assign Carolyn to handle the B file was the direct result of his personal failings, but also the reason he allowed Rusty to continue leading the murder investigation for a while. He was too afraid to prosecute the killer himself for fear of this file coming out.
He was completely paralyzed. He feared that any vigorous, politically motivated investigation into Carolyn's death would uncover the bribery ring. He was trying to contain 2 explosions at once.
And the investigation finally takes a shocking turn when Rusty learns of Carolyn's other significant relationship.
One that is intrinsically tied to the very corruption Horgan was so terrified of exposing.
This is a devastating piece of information, and it comes from a low-level cop, Lionel Kennelly, who's just drinking a beer in a dingy station.
And Kennelly drops this racist bombshell. Carolyn was sleeping with the nigger, Judge Lauren Little.
Judge Little, who we know was Raymond Horgan's old partner, is now the chief judge. But his position doesn't reflect success. It reflects exile.
Little had a powerful background. He'd given up a highly successful defense practice, but personally, he was in a judicial dumping zone, the North Branch, where he only handled picayune matters. He was struggling severely after a divorce, drinking heavily, gambling. He was damaged goods professionally and personally.
And the affair with Carolyn wasn't just physical. It was tied directly to his corruption.
Right. In the North Branch, where Little was exiled, this affair was not secret. And Kenny Lee confirms the devastating link. Carolyn used to carry money to him.
Wow.
This suggests Carolyn was actively involved in facilitating or maybe managing Little's illicit dealings, possibly linked to the bribery ring Horgan was so desperate to hide.
So this detail connects the victim, the high-ranking judge, and the institutional bribery file. Little himself is described as having a black man's authentic education in the countless ways that prosecutorial discretion can be used to arrogantly excuse unreasoning caprice.
That phrase is so crucial. Little understood exactly how the system could be abused by figures like Horgan or Molto. He had this innate, deep-seated distrust of the state's power structure, which, combined with his compromised financial and emotional state, created a nexus of dangerous power.
And this connection, Carolyn Little and the B-File, becomes the true heart of Kindle County's rot, and it will profoundly influence the entire murder trial. The political environment finally gives way to the legal battle. After Nico de la Guardia wins the election, Rusty visits Raymond Horgan's office expecting a professional transition. Instead, he gets what he calls Black Wednesday.
He's initially worried about the B-File becoming public, but Molto, he quickly disabuses him of that notion. Molto delivers the true, devastating blow. It's about the fact that you were in Carolyn's apartment the night she was killed.
Rusty's reaction is just disbelief and rage, but Molto has the hard evidence ready. He cites the phone records, the home phone tolls MUD records,
which stands for Message Unit Detail Records. These are the printouts from the phone company detailing every single call made from Rusty's home phone to Carolyn's that evening. This is the ultimate accidental piece of evidence that his wife left behind.
The legal paperwork itself is designed to humiliate him. When Rusty reads the indictment, he sees this archaic, aggressive language. Trespass via armis?
Trespass with force and arms, yeah. He feels instantly linked to the all-stars of crime, John Dillinger, Bluebeard, Jack the Ripper. The system he served has now turned him into a historical monster.
And the grand jury indicts him only for murder, strategically avoiding the easier-to-prove obstruction charge.
Because Nico and Molto want the maximum political return, a conviction of a high-ranking official.
So his lawyer, the short, soft-spoken, but incredibly shrewd Sandy Stern, now has this monumental task of defending him against a purely circumstantial case. Let's detail the four main pillars of physical evidence Nico and Molto stack up. This is all designed to create a narrative of a rejected lover turned killer.
Right. The first pillar is the fingerprints. They found 2 of Rusty's prints on a glass at the crime scene. These were identified from the known prints he provided 12 years ago when he first became a deputy PA.
Okay. The second pillar, and maybe the most damaging early on, is the fibers.
Yeah, they found malt-colored Zorak V fibers matching the carpeting in Rusty's home, specifically from their living room, on Carolyn's clothing, her corpse, and scattered around the apartment. And the narrow specificity of the search warrant used to collect these samples shows just how targeted and premeditated Nico and Molto's investigation was.
The third is the MUD records we just talked about. They show a call placed from Rusty's house to Carolyn's about 90 minutes before the estimated time of death.
And crucially for the prosecution, there are no subsequent calls from Rusty's house after 7:32 p.m., which allows them to argue he was at Carolyn's apartment for the rest of the evening.
And the fourth, which aims to prove the motive, is the vaginal smear.
The lab found spermatozoa of Rusty's blood type A-type antibodies. It's a 1 in 10 chance coincidence, low enough to be suspicious, but not conclusive. But critically, this sample also contained a contraceptive compound, spermicide.
So the prosecution argues this implied a consensual sexual act shortly before the murder, suggesting a moment of passion that was followed by rage.
And finally, they shore up their circumstantial case with the narrative of concealment, driven by Lepranzer's testimony.
His friend.
Despite their long history and loyalty, Lepranzer is forced to testify that Rusty instructed him not to collect his home phone tolls, which, combined with Rusty's initial emotional outburst in Raymond's office, paints him as actively manipulating the evidence to hide his involvement.
The trial opens, and the defense gets a major break, though one that's steeped in corruption. Judge Lauren Little is assigned the case.
And we know Little has a long, notorious history of bitter disputes with Tommy Molto from the North Branch Court. He is clearly, immediately, and profoundly indisposed to the state's point of view.
He's not subtle about his bias at all.
No, he views this prosecution, led by Molto, as the arrogant exercise of prosecutorial caprice he's spent his career observing. He uses his judicial authority to aggressively control the courtroom from the start.
But Nico Della Guardia starts with a political fireworks show in his opening statements. He publicly reveals Rusty's affair with Carolyn, a dramatic moment designed to shock the jury. But then he drops a new, critical, and undisclosed detail.
That Carolyn was also having a relationship with Raymond Horgan.
Right.
That revelation had been cabined. It had been kept secret by Nico to protect his new political alliance with the disgraced Horgan. But Nico just couldn't resist the drama. He needed to prove the depth of the corruption in the old PA's office.
And the mention of his former partner's entanglement causes Judge Little to momentarily lose his cool.
Which, while powerful, also signals Nico's recklessness.
The political betrayal then reaches its peak with Raymond Horgan's testimony. The former PA wears the same subtle blue serge suit he wore at Carolyn's funeral and exchanges a fond smile with Nico, a chilling signal that they are now the fastest friends.
Horgan is focused entirely on justifying his own downfall. He testifies that Rusty didn't pursue the investigation vigorously, implicitly because Rusty was the killer, and openly implies that Rusty's actions and the resulting scandal led directly to his political ruin.
He openly believes Rusty killed Carolyn to bring him down.
It's a devastating character assassination from the man who was once his mentor.
But Sandy Stern immediately moves to reclaim the narrative, using Horgan to introduce the defense theory. The frame-up. Stern starts probing Horgan about the secret B file.
And Judge Little tries to shut it down, citing grand jury secrecy, acting more faithful than a Labrador to the legal process.
But Stern is too skilled. He establishes critical facts. First, the file was so sensitive that Raymond assigned it to Carolyn secretly without telling anyone, including Molto or Rusty.
Second, Raymond only handed the file to Rusty when Rusty noticed it was missing, implying Raymond was covering for himself.
So by connecting the B file to the victims, Stern creates enough smoke to announce his defense theory to the court and the press that Rusty was framed.
And this shifts the entire focus from Rusty's guilt to the vast corruption within the PA's office.
The prosecution's case relies almost entirely on that physical evidence, and Stern just systematically takes apart their scientific witnesses, starting with the coroner, Dr. Painless Kumagai.
Kumagai is an immediate liability. Nico, in his direct examination, uses the coroner to testify that Rusty threatened him and tried to coerce him into ruling Carolyn's death an accidental result of deviant sexual activity.
To show Rusty's manipulation.
Exactly. But Stern immediately counterattacks by establishing Kumagai's blatant political motive. Kumagai is forced to admit he wants to be coroner and that the PA's recommendation, now Nico's, would help him achieve that ambition. He also admits talking regularly with Molto during the investigation,
establishing the link between the forensic evidence and the political office.
And then Stern just destroys his credibility with that incredible anecdote about his nickname. He forces Kumagai to admit that Painless came from a former deputy PA who said the only person who found working with him painless was the corpse because it was dead.
It's a devastating public humiliation that severely undercuts the jury's trust in his testimony.
But the truly fatal blow comes when Stern addresses the fourth pillar of evidence: the vaginal smear containing the spermicide. The prosecution chemist, Kemp, had already noted that no birth control devices or cream were found in the apartment, which makes the spermicide's presence suspicious.
And Stern sets up this dramatic reversal perfectly. He keeps circling back to the spermicide and the question of consent. He asks Kumagai directly if Carolyn Polhemus was a woman who knew she could not conceive.
And Kumagai, caught off guard, says no.
This is the point of no return. Stern presses. If a woman knew she couldn't conceive, wouldn't it be unreasonable, even absurd, to use spermicide?
Kumagai is absolutely trapped. His political allegiance and his ambition force him to choose between protecting Molto's case and protecting his own professional reputation.
And he collapses.
Completely. He collapses under the pressure, admitting that it is possible that the specimen, the one with the spermicide and Rusty's blood type, was not taken from the body of Carolyn Polhemus.
The narrator describes the reaction as a collective gasp from the jury box. For Chris' sake.
That single admission suggests either profound forensic incompetence or, far worse, that the key piece of evidence was manufactured and planted by the prosecution itself. This admission single-handedly demolishes the entire sexual assault and murder scenario that Molto built.
The physical evidence just continues to crumble when the fingerprint expert takes the stand. The prosecution had focused so intensely on the 2 prints of Rusty's found on the glass, using them to place him at the scene.
But the defense reveals that the glass had another latent print, a third person's. And compounding the mystery and supporting the frame-up theory, the expert reveals there were 5 other unidentified latent prints, not Rusty's, not Carolyn's, found throughout the apartment on latches, bottles, and tables.
This is significant because the presence of these unidentified prints from individuals with no prior criminal record strongly suggests that someone unknown had access to the apartment.
Or that someone was meticulous enough to wear gloves but failed to clean up every surface. It provides immediate, credible doubt that Rusty was the only person with access to Carolyn that night.
So, with the forensic case destroyed and the frame-up theory gaining traction, Nico de la Guardia makes a desperate last-ditch effort to save the prosecution. He attempts to call Tommy Molto to the stand.
Judge Little immediately denies it. Little is now openly hostile to the prosecution, accusing Molto and Kumagai of manufacturing evidence and testimony. Little emphasizes that the state's chief piece of evidence, the glass with Rusty's prints, mysteriously disappeared after being last seen in Molto's custody.
And Nico, in a final, highly improper maneuver, calls Dr. Miles Robinson, Rusty's psychiatrist, to the stand. The clear intent here is to force privileged communications into the record to undermine Rusty's character and mental state.
But Little anticipates the tactic. He sustains every single objection from Stern, rigorously protecting the doctor-patient privilege and sending a clear signal to the jury that Nico is resorting to unethical and improper tactics to secure a conviction.
And Molto, furious and arguing with the judge's sustained rulings, is ultimately held in contempt of court.
The outcome is inevitable. Judge Little halts the trial and directs a verdict of acquittal, discharging Rusty. This isn't an admission of innocence by the state. It's a legal victory based purely on judicial intervention.
Yeah, and Little is explicit that his decision is based on the utter collapse of the prosecution's case. The destruction of Kumagai's testimony, the missing evidence, and the conclusion that the testimony was manufactured by Molto and Kumagai for political gain.
He even apologizes to Rusty for the disgrace to the cause of justice. It's a victory won by strategically weaponizing the prosecution's incompetence and corruption against them, achieving freedom without achieving clarity.
Despite the acquittal, Rusty is far from free. His first act is to confront Sandy Stern, his brilliant lawyer, accusing him of knowing the full extent of the corruption, about the B file, Little and Carolyn's relationship, and the fact she carried money to the judge.
And this confrontation is necessary for Rusty to understand just how profoundly compromised the system was. Stern, while maintaining professional distance, reluctantly confirms the deep-seated corruption. Little was in a state of disorder, drinking, gambling, and that the North Branch was indeed a beehive of illicit dealing.
Stern is the ultimate pragmatist here. He acknowledges the filth, but focuses only on his professional commitment to his client. He assures Rusty that Little's directed verdict was still within his judicial discretion.
The implication is that in Kindle County, corruption is just the water they swim in.
Right. And the final confirming piece of the institutional rot comes from Raymond Horgan. Horgan later admits that immediately after Carolyn was killed, Judge Little called him and asked him to collect that file immediately. This confirms the direct, panicked link between the judge, the dead prosecutor, and the missing bribery file.
Raymond claims he was just messed up and only gave Carolyn the B file because of their affair. But the reality is that Carolyn Polhemus was killed right when the long-dormant judicial and political conspiracy involving Little and Horgan was on the verge of being exposed. The frame-up, driven by Molto's political ambition, makes perfect sense in this environment.
So Rusty's acquittal is achieved by Stern, convincing the court that Molto and Nico framed him to cover up a decade-old conspiracy and win an election. This is the truth the court accepts, that Rusty was a victim of political vengeance and institutional rot.
But the bitter ultimate truth is something entirely different, something Rusty takes months of numb reflection to process. He finally explains the facts that only he would know to lip rancer, revealing the identity of the true killer.
His wife's Barbara Sabich.
The shock of this revelation is devastating because it recontextualizes every single piece of evidence and every moment of emotional struggle in the book.
Aunt Barbara's motive was this frightening mix of profound rage, vengeance for the affair, and in a deeply twisted way, a desperate attempt to save her marriage.
She committed murder as a monumental act of commitment and devotion. She didn't just want the rival gone. She wanted Rusty to know she was the one who did it. thereby forcing him to become her eternal accomplice and bind them together forever in a shared, unspeakable secret.
And this act was executed with a frightening level of precision, confirming that Barbara, the seemingly demure wife, was capable of intricate levels of complex thought.
Oh, the setup was meticulous. It anticipated how Rusty, the prosecutor, would try to investigate the crime he was suspected of.
Okay, let's break down her perfect crime setup. She made it look like a classic stranger rape. Unforced entry, binding. She used the spermicide to imply consensual sex before death, intending to direct suspicion toward a lover, and specifically toward Rusty.
And she left Rusty's fingerprints on the glass, which she had touched earlier, assuming he would just shove it under the rug when he was leading the investigation.
And she planted the malt-colored Zorak V carpet fibers from their home, knowing they would be traced back to Rusty's environment. The entire design was for Rusty, as Chief Deputy PA, to find these clues and botch the investigation against himself to save his own skin.
Thereby protecting her. It's chilling. She leveraged her intimate knowledge of his life and his job to create a perfect self-sabotage mechanism.
But she made two crucial mistakes that saved Rusty from a murder conviction.
Right. First, she didn't anticipate the zeal of Molto and Nico. She didn't foresee the sophisticated forensic tools like fiber analysis or the existence of the MUD records that trace the call from their house, placing the crime in a defined timeline.
But the most fatal discovery, the one that broke the entire prosecution's case and freed Rusty, was the one piece of private medical history she didn't know.
Exactly. Barbara didn't know that Carolyn Polhemus had tied her tubes. So since Carolyn knew she could not conceive, the presence of spermicide in the specimen was utterly unreasonable and absurd, exactly as Stern argued. That crucial fact allowed Stern to discredit Kumagai and successfully argue that the sample had been manufactured or corrupted.
Which saved Rusty from the gallows, even though Barbara's intended setup failed in its execution. The irony is just crushing.
Barbara succeeded in getting him acquitted, but only because the prosecution had adopted her planted evidence and then failed to defend it when Stern revealed the fatal flaw. Her setup, meant to protect her, was destroyed by Stern's legal brilliance, which relied on evidence Molto and Kumagai had seemingly manufactured.
When Rusty finally confronts Barbara with the unspeakable truth, he explains that no one would have believed she was the killer because it sounded like a bizarre effort to save me.
Her act of ultimate devotion was so monstrously improbable that it was legally invisible.
And Barbara is relieved to have the truth spoken, but she is just consumed by guilt and shame. She confesses that she feels crazy and unable to reconcile who she is with what she has done. She can't go on living with him.
And her final chilling statement is, "The trial came out the way it should have, Rusty." She leaves him, but she protects their son, Nat.
So Rusty's legally free, acquitted by a directed verdict, but the cost is immense and absolute. He's lost his wife. His professional standing at judgeship is now impossible due to the baggage of the trial and his personal innocence.
He realizes that he is truly his father's son, inheriting a grimness of outlook and the deep knowledge that there is more cruelty in life than simple wits can comprehend. His victory is a Pyrrhic one, achieved by exploiting the same corruption that nearly destroyed him.
And what about the man who leveraged the murder for power? Nico de la Guardia, the newly elected PA, is struggling politically because he's seen as a goat for the failed prosecution. He's fighting accusations of a cover-up regarding the Molto Kumagai scandal, which has now become a public liability.
And Nico, always the political animal, tries to gauge Rusty's future potential, telling him, "Nothing has changed. A year ago, you could have beat me in the election and you could do it today."
The cycle of ambition and deception just continues, unpainted by the actual quest for truth.
The novel ends with the institutional structure of Kindle County merely shifting its seating arrangements, rather than undergoing any true purification. The ambitious prosecutor won the election, but only to inherit the scandal his tactics created. The corrupt judge achieved his vengeance against the PA's office, and the accused walks free, carrying a heavier sentence than any court could impose, the knowledge of his wife's monstrous love.
So we've taken this deep dive into presumed innocent, and we've witnessed how a seemingly straightforward murder investigation became a labyrinth of institutional corruption, that little B file linked political warfare between Horgan and Nico, and a truly pathological personal betrayal that involved the killer setting up her own husband.
And I think the central takeaway is that Rusty's acquittal was a triumph of legal strategy, not an affirmation of justice. Sandy Stern won by successfully weaponizing the prosecution's own incompetence, their corruption, and their manufactured evidence against them. In Kindle County, justice is simply the result of better maneuvering.
It forces us to confront the origin of these dark acts. Rusty reflects on Carolyn's life, noting that she could not leave the horrible weight of her past behind. She tried to present herself as someone who had triumphed over her agonies, but ultimately she was undone by the deep currents of her history and her choices.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought that Turow leaves hanging over this entire narrative. If triumph over the past is impossible for someone like Carolyn, if her personal torments made her susceptible to participating in corruption, the question remains for you, the listener. Is it truly possible for all of us to escape the agonies and torments that drive our darker, more desperate impulses?
Or are those impulses, like Barbara's ultimate monumental act of commitment and devotion, just waiting for the right moment of stress and betrayal to emerge and redefine our lives? That is something worth mulling over long after the verdict is read.